Well, the bad news Broncos are back. The Denver Broncos lose to the Los Angeles Chargers 23-16. They now fall to 3-3 on the season. The Broncos once again went down by double digits in this game like they did last week, but unlike last week against the Raiders, they were unable to overcome that deficit. It got to a point where the Broncos were down 23-0. I believe that was even in the beginning stages of the fourth quarter. The Broncos did pitch a late comeback effort, but it ultimately fell short. They were unable to secure the victory today when a lot of people thought that they were going to have a favorable matchup against a beat-up Chargers team. But injuries as well as poor execution ultimately led the Broncos astray today, and that is why they lost. But I want to talk about the slow start that the Denver Broncos got off to in this game. It seems to be a common theme, especially at home under Sean Payton, that the Broncos get off to these slow starts. I think each individual game has its own storyline and has its own reasoning for why the team got off to a slow start. In this particular one, it was just a lack of execution, especially on third down. You think about the first third down that the Broncos faced, they ended up throwing it up over the middle. They had a chance to hit it. It was on a dig route. Bo could have hit it, but he had bad footwork on the play, and it leads to him sailing the ball, and it gets intercepted by the Chargers. So the Chargers get favorable field position on their first offensive possession. The Broncos defense on their first snap of the game loses their best player in Pat Surtain. He goes down with that concussion, and unfortunately, with the NFL's concussion protocol taking at least 5 days, and that starts on Monday, Pat Surtain won't be able to clear the concussion protocol in time for Thursday night. But that's another issue that we're going to have to address later on. But when Pat Surtain exited from a moral standpoint or just morality standpoint, obviously the Broncos defense was dejected not having their leader and best player out there. But from an execution standpoint, it made things a lot harder. Per NFL Next Gen stats, the Broncos actually ran the most man coverage that they have all season long in this game. But they struggled to execute when they played man coverage, especially on third down. Riley Moss got picked on a little bit. He struggled especially on in-breakers and crossing routes, which by nature are man coverage beaters. Normally you can learn to live with those, but when you really need to get a stop on third down and you're giving up those kind of plays, or when you're bringing an all-out blitz on one play in particular I remember, and Justin Herbert just floats it up and it ended up getting caught. It's stuff like that where you're not executing in those key third down situations, especially in man coverage. But when the Broncos had to peel back and play zone, they played a good bit of zone in this game. Justin Herbert diced them up. The Broncos, defensively, you have to imagine their game plan kind of went askew the moment that Pat Surtain went out there. But this wasn't a schematic issue defensively. This was a lack of execution issue, especially on third down and especially against man coverage. But when you look at the start the Broncos got off to, I want to bring in the first three drives of the game here. The first drive, you have the interception where Bo Nix sails the ball. You get the stop defensively after a pretty long drive, so credit where it's due there. But then on your second drive, you got a third down and 1 at the 43. You've got a chance to convert once again and keep your drive going. But you try to use some dummy cadence crap, and it catches your guys off guard. Garrett Bowles was credited for the false start, but a couple of Broncos jumped on that play. And 5-yard penalty, you're backed up to third down and 6. I remember on that third down and 6 play in particular, nobody was open. I saw it on the TV broadcast afterwards, and that didn't really show it, but being at the game, seeing it in person, nobody was open. And that was another big issue, was receivers just weren't getting open throughout the game. Then, defensively, on your next possession, you give up that 38-yard touchdown to Kamani Vidal. Again, just a lack of execution on that side of the ball. This isn't a schematic issue. Just like last year, after the Broncos finally pivoted away from the Vance Joseph crap, or from the Vic Fangio crap on defense, and went strictly to what Vance Joseph likes to do schematically, it wasn't a schematic issue then either. It was just a personnel issue or an execution issue. And today, it was the execution compounded by a loss of significant personnel in Pat Surtain. But then on the offensive side of the ball, you still struggle with the overall execution on third down. The third down percentage for this team was terrible. In fact, let me see if I can find it right here. On third down, the Chargers were 11 for 18 and the Broncos were 3 for 11. On both sides of the ball, that is terrible third down efficiency. That is really the biggest storyline and the biggest concern in this game. Bo Nix honestly was not nearly as bad as some of the takes that I've seen on Twitter. Did he miss a couple of throws? Yes, he did. On the third possession offensively for the Broncos, they had a chance to hit a deep ball downfield to Marvin Mims, but Bo couldn't hook up with him. Bo wasn't perfect, but when your quarterback is leading your team in rushing 6 carries for 60 yards again, that is a problem. Your run game is struggling to get going, and I hear people saying, well, if your run game is struggling, then why don't you abandon it? Why don't you try to do something else? I want to play this clip from Mark Schlereth's podcast, the Stinkin' Truth podcast. It might explain a little bit more why the Broncos are so stubborn about trying to run the ball and trying to run these swing passes and screens and stuff like that. It might explain it just a little bit more. I'm not saying that it completely justifies it or completely makes it make sense, but just listen to this and it might make it just make a little bit more sense.
There are guys who call plays and there are guys who call an offense. And you call an offense, and what I mean by that is you will see a play caller say, hey man, I really like this play action against this, type of defense that this defense we're playing plays, right? I love it. Out of this formation and this personnel grouping, they're going to play this, particular coverage in this particular front, and they're going to do it 100% of the time. But I hate the run into this front, right? We're not going to get great yardage out of this run because let's say we're running it strong and doing over front and they've got numbers on us, and this run is going to net us about 2 yards per carry, right? And so a lot of just people who just call plays will say, well, screw it, we can't run that, so I'm going to dump that and we're not going to run that play. But a great play caller or a great caller of offense as opposed to just a play caller, but a guy who calls the offense will say, you know what, I get that play ain't worth a shit, right? And it's worth 2 yards a carry. But if we run it and commit to it, we're going to run it 6 times. We're going to get 2 yards per carry. But what it's going to do for us in the passing game, there's a play action off of this where we're going to get this particular defense and this coverage, and we're going to gouge them for 4 different, at some point, 4 different explosives off the play action that I have attached to this run. So that's a guy who calls the offense. He says, I'm going to run this play, understanding I'm only getting 2 yards a carry because it's going to give me this, that is going to be explosive, and that's going to win us a football game. And
okay, so that might at least provide a little bit of insight to why the Broncos commit so much to the run game and why they at times feel like they're stubbornly running into heavy fronts and not allowing this passing game to open up. They're trying to open up the passing game through the run game, but one problem also is your run game is having execution problems where your run blocking is struggling. Some of it is part of this where you're trying to set stuff up and you're running into heavy fronts, but sometimes even when you have the numbers advantage, your run game is struggling because you don't have the blocking that you're looking for. That's one area where the offensive line definitely can improve in my eyes. And the other issue is when your run game isn't getting going, you can't really be as successful setting up some of these play actions and run actions. And that was one thing that Sean Payton was famous for in New Orleans. And you can't sit here and convince me that a coach just 3-4 years ago had one of the most high-flying offenses in the NFL, even with an injured, broken down Drew Brees. You can't sit here and tell me that that coach has suddenly forgotten how to coach an offense. You can't sit here and tell me that a coach who got really good football in 2021 out of Jameis Winston, Trevor Siemian, Taysom Hill, and even Ian Book for a game, you can't tell me that that guy suddenly has forgotten how to call an offense and structure and sequence plays. The problem is the execution has not been there. Now, has Sean Payton's play calling been perfect? No, it has not. You look at especially that 2-point conversion play where I hate when teams try to go east to west to go north to south, especially on 4th down. It's almost never going to work. They tried that stupid pop-up pass, and that was never going to work. That got sniffed out immediately. Just go north to south. Run the damn ball. Run a dive. That's a higher percentage play in that situation than what the Broncos tried to run there. So there are certain play calls in play situations that I don't agree with Sean Payton here. But I'm not going to sit here and say that Sean Payton has suddenly forgotten how to call an offense. It's clear that he's got a method to his madness with some of this stuff. It's just the execution, again, I will say it again, it has not been there. Let's go ahead and go through some of these stats from the game before we officially wrap this one up, guys. Obviously, not a great performance to recap, but Bo Nix did do some good stat padding there in the end, and I actually thought he did make some nice throws. And some people will say, yeah, but the Chargers were backing off and playing soft zone coverage. Some of those reps they were, but they were at one point in danger of losing that lead, so they did tighten up a little bit, and Bo did make a couple of nice tight window throws there at the end. 19 for 33, 216 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Both of those touchdowns came, obviously, after you were already down 23-0. The pick was a very bad play. 2 sacks on the day, and one thing I really want to make note of is he had another play where Garrett Bowles got beat clean off the edge, and he was able to dip under it, Bo was, and he was able to scramble for a 20-yard gain. The dude does a great job of avoiding sacks when he's in trouble, and that's a big element to his game that I don't think should go underappreciated. That is huge. Again, we already talked about when your quarterback is leading your team in rushing, 6 carries, 61 yards. That's a problem. 21 of them came on that one play. Javonte Williams, 6 carries, 23 yards, 3.8 yards per carry. Not terrible, but not great. One complaint that you can certainly have for Sean is why we didn't see more Audric Estime in this game. 2 carries, 13 yards, 6.5 yards per carry. That would have been nice to at least see a little bit more of him. Jaleel McLaughlin, 3 carries, 8 yards. Troy Franklin had that end around for 5 yards, but it got blown up short of the end zone. Or actually, no, I think that technically would have been a reception for him, but either way, it was an end around that went for 5 yards. Devon Vele, once again, led the Broncos in receiving yards. Both games that he's played, he has done that. 4 receptions, 78 yards, 4 catches, 53 yards, and that really nice touchdown catch from Cortland Sutton. Troy Franklin got in the end zone, 2 catches, 31 yards, and a tuggy for him. That was good to see. Jaleel McLaughlin, 2 receptions, 17 yards. Javonte, 3 receptions for 13 yards. So the receiving game from the running backs hasn't been bad. It's just running the football. Lucas Kroll, 2 catches for 11 yards. Again, Denver is getting no production whatsoever out of this tight end room. Javonte Williams with the fumble. Brandon Jones leads the team in tackles. Zach Allen with a half sack. Justin Sternad with a sack. Jonathan Cooper with a half sack as well. And Nick Benito with a whole sack. So yeah, man, not a great day at all from the Broncos, but they have to flush it. They have to flush it quickly because they've got to play in New Orleans on Thursday night. That's got some of his own set of issues with the Pat Surtain injury, but a silver lining there is the fact that Chris Olave is down for the New Orleans Saints with a concussion as well, and he's also not going to have enough time to clear the protocol. So it's in essence a little bit of a wash because New Orleans is down their number 1 receiver, Denver is down their number 1 corner. But either way, New Orleans, they gave up a 50-burger this past week or today to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so we'll see if they ultimately have those same defensive struggles. I haven't seen the game yet. I don't know how Spencer Rattler played, but that obviously also favors the Broncos. They've got to flush this loss. I ultimately don't think play calling is the big issue here for Sean Payton. I just think it's a lack of execution that needs to get better. All right, Broncos country, I am curious. Do you guys think that the main issue for the Broncos today was play calling or was it execution? Drop those comments down below, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. I would really appreciate, guys. Those are both free and easy ways to show your support. It helps tell YouTube's algorithm to push us out, and it helps us get seen by more and more members of Broncos country just like you and me. And until next time, guys, I'm your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.